Hi everybody, it's Tom McElroy at Wild Survival. In this video, I'm gonna take this log and turn it into this hunting bow. Okay, before I get started, I just want you to know that I'm gonna be powering my entire shop with the Bluetti Elite 400 portable power station. This has a 3,840 watt hour capacity, a huge battery, a 2,600 watt inverter, so I'm gonna have no trouble running any of the power tools I need to make this bow. Now, whether I'm in the shop or out in the woods, with this incredibly durable design, a very strong telescoping handle, and very durable rubber wheels, this is gonna go with me wherever I need power. Okay, with the Elite 400, I've got 9 different ports to charge things. I've got 4 AC plugs, I've got 2 USB-C, 2 USB-A, and 1 carport charger. And with its 3,900 watt lifting power, I don't have to worry about devices that have a high draw. Now, one of the main tools you're gonna need when you're making a bow is called a draw knife. Before we get going, I'm gonna sharpen this up real quick. Okay, now the first thing you're gonna need to make a bow is what's called a bow stave. This is just a split off of a tree of a pie wedge, where it's split from the center into a pie wedge so that you still have the bark on the outside. Your first step after you've got your stave is to use your draw knife to gently take off the bark without cutting the wood below it. Now, this type of wood is called Osage Orange. It's one of the best woods for making bows, but there's hundreds of others. If you're curious what works really well in your area, leave me a comment down below and I'll send you a link. But what I'm gonna do is insert my draw knife from the top, pull down, and just slowly take off the bark. You'll understand why later, but you do not want to cut into the wood. So to make a bow that doesn't break, there's basically 2 main things you need to understand. The first one lies in understanding how growth rings work. Now, we all know that trees are made up of growth rings, and when you take a cross section, you can see those concentric circles working their way out to the edge. Right now, you can see I've got a darker kind of orange band of wood and then a white ring, and then a darker orange band of wood and a white ring. That white ring is what we call spring growth. That's a much weaker kind of corkboard-like material, or I'll even relate it to cardboard here. And so if I match this, I'm gonna say that this piece of corrugated cardboard is like the consistency of that white ring. Then you hit a very solid layer of that wood, which here is orange. Then I've got another layer of spring growth, which is like the corrugated cardboard. It's a bit nice and soft. And then a harder layer of wood, next year's growth. And each one of these layers represents 1 year of the tree's life. Okay, so I want to make this as simple as possible so that you can understand it and tell you why it's important that you understand growth rings. Now, I've made a fake bow out of those wooden slats. And you can see that I've got it strung. And if I were shooting you, just so you know the technical term of it, the side of the bow that's facing you is what we call the back of the bow. The side of the bow right now that's facing me is called the belly of the bow. Okay, so this entire back of the bow, the part that's facing outward, is one entire slat. So you can see that's one uninterrupted layer of that winter growth wood, okay, like that. If I tie a string to the ends and I pull on that, that one band of wood is gonna pull all the other layers backwards with it. If that wasn't one solid band of wood, what if I accidentally cut into that layer down to the next growth ring? What's gonna happen is when I go to pull my bow back, all that pressure is gonna pull those growth rings apart, okay? And your bow's gonna break. So when you make a bow, the part facing you, so let's say this is my bow stave, the part that's facing you needs to be one entire growth ring of that winter growth. Now, the easy way to shortcut this is don't use Osage Orange. Osage Orange is an amazing wood, I love it. But if you went out in the spring and cut down a hickory tree, you could very easily peel off the bark in the spring. It peels off like a banana skin, it's so easy. And this entire layer is gonna be one growth ring of wood. So that's gonna be solid, there's no cuts in it, obviously, and you can basically just skip right to the next step. All right, now the trick with Osage Orange is that instead of like hickory, where the outer band of wood is great, the first few rings on the outside of Osage Orange is a white wood called sapwood. This isn't as strong as the dark orange wood on the inside that makes the prized really nice bows. And so In order to make a bow out of Osage Orange, what we need to do is carve off the layers of sapwood until we hit a one solid band of that orange wood. Now you can imagine if I had a draw knife, I could pretty much easily slide it between these two hard bands of wood, and I could feel the difference in the corrugated cardboard. So if I slip my draw knife in there and slowly cut away until I hit the cardboard, I could peel back one layer until I was straight down to one solid growth ring. This is basically what you need to do when you're taking down growth rings from an Osage tree. You're going to learn to see it and feel it. All right, here you can see I'm slipping my draw knife between the growth rings and removing the entire top growth ring from one end to the other. All right, here I'm cutting and scraping away with my draw knife. And if you look closely, you can see the clean bottom band of wood, the spring growth layer in between, and the top layer of sapwood. Okay, so what I'm doing now is sliding my draw knife between the two layers, this top layer and the layer I want to stop at, this growth ring. And so I'm putting my draw knife in between those layers right where the spring growth is and just pulling off anything above it. You can see this section is very clean, clear. It's that one solid orange band of that winter growth. Then you can see a pale yellow layer, and that's that spring growth. The spring growth feels different. It's very corky. It looks different. It's pale yellow. You can actually hear the difference when you're riding between those two layers. It's a kind of a crunchy sound. So you're really putting all your senses into this to gently pull off that top layer. I'm going to keep working my way down in 4-inch sections until I get to the bottom. And then the back of the bow is completely done. We're never going to touch it again. Okay, the next step is to draw the dimensions of our bow on the back of our bow stave. To make this as simple as possible, I'm going to use this diagram here to represent the markings I'm putting on the bow. Now your first step is to basically draw a center line. And if your stave is as perfectly straight as this hickory tree, that means you can basically just snap a center line right down from tip to tip down the length. If your stave is like Osage and the grain kind of goes off this way and it comes back, you actually have to start the center line but trace down following the grain all the way. Okay, now that we've drawn a center line for the width, I'm also going to mark a center line that's perpendicular, marking the length. So if this stave, or the stave I'm going to be using, is 62 inches long, I'm going to measure 31 and I'm going to mark the center line right at that 31 mark. Next step is to draw out the handle. So I have a 4-inch handle, so that means from this center line, I'm going to do 2 inches above, 2 inches below, and mark those two lines, and that's going to give me 4 inches for the handle. Now my handle is going to be 1 inch wide to start, and so I'm going to measure from the vertical center line a 1/2 inch on each side and marking out a 1 inch wide handle. The next measurement we're going to put in is just above the handle. You're going to mark what's called the fade out. The fade out is where it tapers out from the width of the handle to the widest part of the bow. To mark that, above the handle, I'm going to mark out 1.5 inches. Below the handle, I'm going to mark out 1.5 inches. And the widest part of my bow is going to be 1.5 inches wide. So I'm going to measure 3/4 of an inch from the center line on each side and connect the dots between that and the width of the handle. My next step is to mark the tips. The tips are going to be about 3/5 of an inch wide. So on each side at the top here, on each side of the center line, I'm going to mark out 3/10 of an inch, giving me an overall 3/5 width at the tip. Now I'm going to taper from the widest part of the bow by the handle all the way to the tip. So I'm going to connect those two dots, and I'm going to get the width of my limb tapering from 1.5 inches down to 3/5 of an inch at the tips. Do that on all sides, draw it on your bow, and then you're ready to cut it out with the bandsaw. All right, so I've got the outline of my bow drawn out on the back of the bow. It's time now to cut it out. I'm going to power up this bandsaw with the Elite 400, which has been sitting around but is still at 78% power because this thing is very efficient. It only burns 3 watts when on standby mode, so even if you leave it sitting in the corner, it's barely going to burn any energy. The bandsaw should be fine with the 2600 watt inverter, but in case it surges and needs a little extra power, the Blue Yeti Elite 400 also has a 3900 watt lifting power, which can easily handle that type of surge. All right, so the bandsaw made quick work of that. I stayed outside of my lines by a few millimeters. I don't try to go right up to the line. The bandsaw does everything very quickly, which is amazing, but can also ruin your bow very quickly if you mess up or slip or see things incorrectly. So I'm gonna take a file and file down to that line just to make sure that everything's perfect. The Elite 400 handled that no problem. This does great against high draw devices. It didn't even need to use any of the burst. But it powered my bandsaw, my camera lights, and all the lights in the shop. So this thing's definitely a beast. For now on the bow, I've got my back, I've got my profile. Right now, this thing's 2 inches thick. To make this start to bend, I'm gonna actually make it thinner. And I'm gonna do that slowly with a file eventually. But for now, I know I can easily take off a solid 1/2 inch of wood along the limb here. And that's not even gonna be close to bending. So just to save myself a little time while I've got the bandsaw, I'm gonna trim down the thickness of this bow as well. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is take a guesstimate, or I can basically measure my other bow and know that a 1/2 inch thick here is kind of where it's gonna start bending. So if I do 3/4 of an inch thick and trace a line from there, let's even do a little less than 3/4, and just say, I know this bow is not going to be bending even if I take off all the wood on that side. And so what I'm going to do is I just put my finger against the bow, and that way it follows the back of the bow. And I just trace with my pencil, just kind of a rough line to guide me when I'm using the bandsaw. Okay, in order to put recurves into the bow, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to take a heat gun and I'm gonna heat the last 8 inches or so of the limb. Now, when wood is cold, the fibers are very stiff and joined together, but as you heat them, they kind of spread apart and swell, and that makes it so that they're more flexible. So what I can do is heat the wood up, let those fibers swell, and then bend it into whatever position I want, and then let it cool down, and it'll lock into whatever position I hold it in. Okay, I've got my heat gun plugged into my Blue Yeti portable power station. I'm gonna heat the last 10 inches or so of the wood, make sure that everything is really nice and heat to its core. You don't wanna burn it, so just make sure you're moving it a lot, keeping it away, watching to make sure that you're not getting any browning or anything, because that might weaken the wood. All right, so I've got my bow, I've got it down to 1 growth ring, I've got the profile cut out, the outline perfectly cut out, so everything's symmetrical. I've recurved the tips so that they're bending nice, and both recurves came out fairly evenly. And right now, I obviously can't take wood off from this one front growth ring on the back of the bow. We don't want to cut that. I perfectly profiled the sides, so I can't cut any more from the sides. So the only place I can take wood off to help this bow be a lighter weight than what it currently is taking it off the belly of the bow. Second step, you need to understand how to properly tiller. I've got my bow here, and when I drew my line, I drew a pretty much equal thickness from the handle all the way to the tip. Now, here's something you need to understand. Let's go back to that slat from that slat bow I had and bend it. This thing is perfectly equal in thickness, right? You could do this with one of those wooden coffee stirrers, and you push on both ends. Where is the majority of the bend happening when I push on both ends? Now you can see that most of the curvature is happening right at the middle here, okay? The ends here where my hands are kind of straightening out. Not as much bend is happening there. So here's the question. If I want it so that the bend isn't just happening here, but I want it to bend here, a little here, a little here, a little here, a little here, all the way to the end so it makes a perfect arc, what do you need to do? How can you carve this piece of wood so it's not just bending in the middle and so that the ends are also bending just a little bit? Okay, the answer is, what if, because naturally most of the energy goes to the middle, so that's bending a lot. But what if I just removed a little bit of thickness as I worked my way out towards the tips? That would encourage this part to bend a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more as it gets to the tips. And instead of just the middle bending and the ends being straight, the entire bow is going to bend in a really nice even arc. So when I am looking at this bow, right now it's about equal thickness. What I'm actually going to start to do is when I file, it's already bending a little. I've got to take some weight off of it anyway. So I'm going to have it taper in thickness from the handle ever so slightly. Every few inches, it tapers like another millimeter all the way to the tips. And what that's going to do is spread out the energy so it doesn't just bend in this section, but it actually all absorbs the energy equally and bends in a nice arc. Now, the reason I need a nice arc to the limb without it bending disproportionately in one spot is I need to spread out the pressure exerted on the bow over the entire limb, so no one part of the bow is taking up all the pressure. Okay, as I said, to do this, the first step is to taper the limbs from handle to tip. Then we start floor tillering. When we bend it on the floor, we look at where it's bending too much and where it's not bending enough. Okay, so I've taken my bow down from the handle to the tips, just to the point where it's just starting to bend. Done it on both sides. I can kind of tell this side's a little thicker, so I actually probably need to work a little more on this side. But for now, let's do a quick floor tiller. Floor tillering is when you put the tip on the ground, your hand on the handle, and other hand on the top. And what I'm gonna do is just kind of turn my thigh into it a little bit. And you can see already, it's definitely starting to bend more. Looks fairly even. Maybe not so much in here. Could use a little more bend in there, but I do feel that it's bending more. Now with the same amount of pressure, I'm not getting as much bend out of this other limb. So what I'm gonna do now is everything looks like it's bending nicely, but I'm gonna thin this limb out to match this one perfectly. And I can just tell, how much pressure I'm putting here. If I put the exact same amount, I'm getting a little more bend out of this limb. So it's time to just thin this one out slightly, and then we'll get to the next step. The main rule with tillering is remove wood where it's not bending enough and leave wood behind where it's bending too much. Okay, so I've evened out both limbs and putting some pressure on them and getting some bend out of them. And definitely getting down closer and closer towards what I'm feeling like is probably 70 pounds, 65 pounds on this bow right now. So I need to take off 15 more pounds of pressure to pull it back. But right now I've got a ton of file marks throughout my bow. And so once I get to this stage, I'm gonna slow things way down. I'm gonna take out a cabinet scraper or just a knife, and I'm gonna start scraping off wood evenly, nitpicking to try to make sure that that taper's good, checking the floor tiller as I go to see if there's any stiff spots, and just slowly working my way down until all these file marks are off. And then from there, everything's just gonna be very light scraping until it's down exactly to the weight I want with a really nice bend to it. Okay, so I've scraped it down. All the file marks are out. As I was scraping, obviously I'm constantly watching. You have to be really careful at this stage, but I want to make sure it's tapering down, no fat spots, touch those up. So at this point, my next step is to file in some nocks so I can tie on a bowstring. To create a nock for my bowstring, I use a chainsaw file, about 1 inch down from the tips and held at a 45-degree angle. Okay, so we've got it floor tillering. It's bending really nice. Now comes the true test of putting a string on and really putting some bend into the limbs to find out if they're bending equally and at the weight that I need them to bend. Before I do that though, I'm gonna sand everything on the back and the sides. Make sure there's nothing that feels like a splinter. Make sure it's perfectly smooth. So I'm gonna start with some 180, work my way probably up to 800 and make sure it's absolutely glossy. All right, so we are at the final stage of bow making. This is called final tillering. This is where I string up my bow with a bowstring and I start pulling on the string, and that will tell me if both sides of the bow are bending at the same rate and if they're bending in a nice arc with no hinges or stiff spots. I've got my bow held against the wall here with a piece of leather. I've got the string on it and basically rigged up a pulley system so that I can pull on this rope from afar, and when I do, it's going to pull down on my bowstring allowing me to see what's happening in the bow from 6-10 feet away, which gives you a better perspective. When you're doing floor tillering, it's nice, but you're so close, sometimes you miss things. So it's going to give me a perspective of the entire bow. One thing I've added, as you'll see, is a very heavy-duty luggage scale. This goes up to a couple hundred pounds, but basically I just want to have this here so that I know that I never exceed the final weight of the bow. If I'm hoping that the bow is going to be 50 pounds, I never want to pull it more than 50. So this is going to tell me when I'm right on the money as far as the strength I want to get out of the bow. For now, we're just going to start pulling on this, and from your perspective, just look, use these parallel level lines to see which limb is bending the most and which one has stiff spots or hinges. Okay, clearly on this, the left side is bending more. It's bending nice, more even. Here, still near the handle, it needs to let loose up just a little bit. Okay, what I'm seeing is the left limb is still too stiff. Right limb's actually bending fairly nice, maybe in the middle. There's an issue of stiffness. It's kind of hard to tell because there's a whoop there, a little change in the grain. So I think that might be okay. But the biggest issue is, see, once I pull the right side down to the first line, left side's not quite there yet. So clearly the right side is a little weaker than the left side. And better, it definitely looks like that left side is still a little bit weaker, or a little bit stronger. Gotta find out what it is about that side. It's not that much. They're both hitting the line. Let's see, this guy hits the line right about there, and he comes in just under it. So just a little bit more touch up on that left side. Hopefully it'll release soon. But it's good to put a little flex in it, make sure that the changes you made are being shown by the wood. But let's see, he hits this line here. This guy doesn't hit it till there, but pretty damn close. Okay, a little more on the left side. Keep going. All right, so I just strung it up, meaning I shortened the string so that there's actually tension on the string even when it's not being pulled on. Brace height's almost fully there, and it's actually looking pretty good. There's some micro tillerings I've got to do, little stiff spots here, but instead of using my knife, what I'm going to do is just slow down and use sandpaper. In that way, when I'm done sanding, done tillering with sandpaper, the bow is done. So at this point, this bow is 95% done. It would be a perfectly working, good bow. What I need to do now is just the tiny details with sandpaper, get it all polished up and ready to go, and hopefully by the time I get it back on here, it's perfectly tillered. But yeah, I'm seeing some movement towards the handle, which is good. I wanted those both to relax. It's pretty solid. Okay, I've done some final touch-ups and everything looks like it's bending real nice. I think everything's pretty even. We're getting to the point where I'm gonna call this good. Put some arrows in it and see where we're at, but it's feeling real nice, super strong. Definitely hitting right in that 50, 55 pound mark at full draw. So I'm gonna give it its final polish, really nice sand job, just probably sand it all night long, put some arrows in it in the morning and see what it looks like at that point. But right now, this thing looks like a screamer. All right, I woke up this morning, shot a few dozen arrows with this, checked the tiller again, and it looks the same. It looks great. If anything, it's improved a little bit from the sanding I did, but it's just got a real nice motion to it. So right now, I am doing my final sanding with 600 grit sandpaper, just making sure this is as smooth as can be. And then I'm going to, sometimes I use tung oil. For this, since it's a gift, I'm going to use spar urethane. It's very protective. And I'm just going to coat this, and that should do it. It should be super protected. So really happy with the results on that. Hopefully you found a couple tips in this video that are different than the other videos in Osage Bowmaking, but If you have questions when you're going along this process, please just write me in the comments below. You can send me pictures and I will gladly give you as much feedback as I can. If you're interested in taking a class in bow making, I'm going to be running one next November, so hit me up on my website, wildsurvivalskills.com, and let's hang out and make some bows. So we're going to wipe it down a few times, let it dry, keep my fingerprints off it. I'll do the handle a little bit. Just give that a nice coating, let that sit, and while that sits, let's check out where we ended up with the Bluetti Elite 400. We're down to 15% from, I think I started with about 90%. This has powered my entire shop, my studio lights, it's powered the belt sander, the heat gun I ran for a solid hour, the bandsaw took a lot of power, and throughout this entire week, I have not needed anything but the power coming out of this huge batteries. Great thing is I can charge this from the wall outlet, I can charge it with the Bluetti solar array, or I can even charge it with my carport charger from 0 to 80% in about 70 minutes. And I'm gonna plug this into my house in case the power goes out. You've noticed it's raining. And if the power does go out, and I've got something plugged in, this will kick on within 15 milliseconds, making sure my Wi-Fi never shuts off, make sure my security cameras are always running, and most importantly, that medical devices never shut off. Last thing I'll mention, it has a smart control app. You can control it from afar. If I want to turn the heat on in the shop before I come in, I can just wake up in the morning and turn it on with the app. So please click the links below and check out the Elite 400.